a grand time together. Um, let's open with prayer. Gracious and Holy One, our light every morning, you welcome us into the world, and with your abundant and lavish care, you meet our hunger and our thirst. So give us eyes wide open to see the feast that you have placed before us on this blessed day. Amen.
Amen.
Well, it is delightful to see all of you. Oh my goodness, we were just talking about, I'm not greeting you from my porch because it's too bloomin' cold out there. It's like upper 30s. Still pretty, but awfully chilly. So we're in cozy and warm here upstairs. And I'm just so happy to see you. You know, when I see folks I haven't seen in a while, I just hardly know what to say. You want to say, how are you? And then, you know, especially in the South, but I know all of you. So we're all going to say, I'm fine. No, we're not fine. I mean, we are in some respects, but we're not fine. And I'm amazed in many ways that we're still having to stay in and stay safe. And this next time I'm seeing you is once again over Zoom. I don't know about you, but for me, it seems like over this past year, every time I've thought, and certainly not even said out loud, but even thought, okay, what next? Oh my goodness, there was a something else that came along as what's next. And often it was worse than what I had anticipated. And you know me, I'm just the biggest cockeyed optimist that you'd ever want to see. But this is weighing on all of us in distant and very close places. I think the numbers are just staggering, and they're so staggering that I think that I fear that I'm going to that they're going to lose any kind of reality for me. You know, so every now and then I try to, in addition to being just very grateful for being here, being safe, being healthy, try to hold in my heart the number of people for whom that is not the case. And the number is so big of the people dying that I read somewhere recently that if we lit a candle for everyone who had died thus far from COVID and set them like 12 inches apart, it would fill the National Mall. That's incredible. And then I read, okay, well, think about how horrible it is when a jet plane crashes. I mean, we had 2 of one kind crash over a period of, I don't know if it was months or a couple of years, and they took it off. I mean, they quit making that one. This is like 8 a day, killing everybody, one after the other after the other. And I think the most sobering for me was something that a friend of mine said not too long ago. She said, I'm trying to wrap my mind around this. And I go back and remember 9/11. And this is the equivalent of 9/11 every day. Now, I don't know what I don't know what to do with those numbers. I don't know what to do with that reality. I both don't know what to do with that as a reality that I can hold in prayer and in my heart, and with a reality that I can deal with and stay sane in any way, or positive or hopeful. So I, you know, this is just my true confession here at the beginning. I don't know how to wrap my mind around this, and I wonder how to make sense of it all, and how to bring it home to my state, to my city, to my county, even into our little home here. And so I was thinking about how do we maintain a sense of calm and of balance and of hope. And you're going to laugh at me, but you've laughed at me before. So I'm going to tell you that more than once a day, more than once on a dark day of news, which seems to be so often lately, when the world seems really scary and turned upside down, I hear the calming voice of Mr. Rogers. Good old Presbyterian minister Fred Rogers.
Yeah.
I love Mr. Rogers. Yep, it's not, where's Hall? I saw him on here, but there he is. I'm sorry, Hall. I'm not going to throw out a philosopher here or some intellectual essayist. It's Mr. Rogers. It's Mr. Rogers whose voice I hear. And I remember his saying, when I was a boy and I would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, look for the helpers. You'll always find people who are helping. Now, I have to, some people have criticized this. I mean, it's become almost a meme. You all could have filled that in. I bet you were filling it in, in your heads if you didn't say it out loud. And some have criticized this, that has come to be a meme, saying that it was never meant for adults. It was meant for children, and and we need to act like adults. And I can take that point to an extent, but I have to say that sometimes the paralyzing news of these days in which we are all living can really leave us feeling like children. And we're not going to stay in that space. We're not going to behave as children. But it's okay, I think, to recognize those days that we feel like children, to recognize and to be able to say either out loud to yourself in the mirror or out loud to somebody with whom you're sharing a home, I'm scared. I'm sad. I don't like this. And I think that's all right. And I just somehow think that it would be all right with Mr. Rogers for us to remember those words too. And I saw that Yvette just said something about we lost Mrs. Rogers this week. And we did. What a lovely, sweet lady she was. So I think taken in perspective, it's not a bad quote at all. And in fact, I think it's imperative for us in these particular days to find ways to redirect our thoughts, to include, not to replace, because we don't want to just live in a completely alternate reality. We have to be aware of what's going on around us, but to include some positive news, to include some things that that can help us get through these days so that we won't drown in these waters of despair. So now, what's all that got to do with the Gospel of John and the two stories I asked you to think about for today? Well, I am so glad you asked, because I think it does. You know, in addition to being frightened on a variety of fronts, we find ourselves, most of us, at home with more time on our hands than usual and more space for thinking. Now, you have over the many years heard me talk about my sweet mama, and she is right here, an hour and 45 minutes away, and she's still living in the home I grew up in by herself, because Daddy's been gone now for, gosh, I was with you when Daddy died 14 years ago. But she's doing great, and I'm her bubble. I am the only one in her house, and I go once a week or more. I'm trying to go more now. My brother can't go in because he's a first responder, but he just got his vaccination and he's about to get his second one. So things are looking up there. Anyway, when we sit and talk, and she has a lot to say after she's been sitting there for a week, since the last time I came. Her conversation goes from here to there, and she asks me all these questions. And one day she said, this is what happens. This is what happens when you have nothing else to do but sit at home and think. You think all kinds of crazy things. And I thought, I can relate to that, because we have more time to let some of those thoughts just spin on down roads that when we're busier, we kind of stop them before. Am I making sense? I'm seeing some nods. Yeah. So we've got this, and here we are living in such different kinds of times. I I have on what one of my good friends here calls soft clothes. I have on a nice sweater, but I have on soft pants and my bedroom slippers because, you know, it's comfortable, and that's what I'm going to have on. And I haven't had a haircut in a year. I'm too old for this hairdo, but you know what? I'm not going to the barber. I'm not going to the salon. So this is what we got. I did put a little lipstick on for you today, so I wouldn't look like, you know, I had just erased into the sunshine here. But everything is so different. And we're thinking about parties not given and visits not made, and the pondering just goes on and on. But one good thing, I think, is that perhaps in all of this time, we've had a chance to really consider what's important, to recognize how grateful we can be if the people we order our groceries from actually bring us apples that we like. You know, it's a really good crisp apple, and I'm so excited. And if it isn't, I'm just so grateful that somebody was willing to get out and work and pick me out an apple and bring it to my front porch. You know, so it matters, but it doesn't matter. We've learned a lot about what we can live without. I've decided I have 3/4, maybe 9/10 of a closet of clothes that frankly I don't need because I haven't worn them in a year. They're and shoes. I love shoes. You all know I love my shoes. Bedroom slippers are what we do. So, except tennis shoes for the walk. So we're thinking about, I hope we're thinking about what things really matter, and those things for which we are incredibly grateful. And if I were to ask you today, where in recent days have you experienced God or God's Spirit? I imagine it would be quite different than what you would have answered a year and a half ago. What do you think? Let's take a second, and you can stick something in the chat box or just actually literally raise your hand. And if one of us sees you, where have you experienced God or God's Spirit in recent days?
Judy, hearing Jody's announcement this morning is now the third person in my circle who has either just had a child or is about to have a child. And I think if Jody gave us this news in January, we would all kind of cheer and be very happy for him, but we wouldn't see it as kind of a transcendent thing. And I have been so struck about the optimism of pregnant people in this time that it is just kind of breathtaking. And it made me go back to read some passages in Paul, in Romans 12:12 about hope. And I think a year ago, Jody, I would have been really, really happy, but I would not have been as moved as I was this morning, and as I was learning about my other friends who are now pregnant, one of whom, by the way, has the middle name of Hope. So I think a different reaction to what we might have thought was, if not commonplace, usual
Right.
Before the pandemic.
It takes on greater significance, doesn't it? And I think it takes on the significance that it's due. You know, we should always be excited for that kind of hope. I remember there's a quote, and I used it on one of my birth announcements, by Carl Sandburg that I love. A baby is God's opinion that the world should go on. Amen. Isn't that lovely? Mm-hmm. I just love that. I'm seeing some comments about mustard seed group, and Being great. I love it, Margaret. Being grateful for every day. Yes. We wake up and okay, here we go. We've got another one. Let's see what we can do with it. Yes. Friends. Oh, Pat. Yes, absolutely. Oh, Yvette, thank you. When we first started all this Zoom stuff, I had never heard of Zoom, and boy, I'm on Zoom a lot right now with meetings and things. And so at first I thought, this is just not the same. But it's really nice to actually see somebody's face. It would be even nicer. It will be even nicer. Let me say it that way. When we can see them, really face to face. But I can't tell you how lovely it is to see your faces and to hear your voices. That's a wonderful familiarity that does lovely things for me. So yes, so Zoom is not perfect, but it's what we've got, and oh, aren't we glad that we've got it? It's really just so nice, so nice. In the midst of all of this craziness and all of these kinds of trials, I think what we all want, what we all need is a sign, some kind of sign. And how, the way you described how you feel, how you react to this news of babies, it's as if you're receiving a sign that's been there all along, but you haven't seen it as a sign before. And signs are a specialty of the gospel writer we call John. Now, how's that for a segue? Signs are especially of the gospel writer we call John. And I find myself these days reading different passages, reading different texts, and how you just mentioned going back to Romans with different eyes. Now, we've talked about this before over the years together, that every time we read a text, we read it fresh, we read it new, we see something, hear something, experience something with it that we haven't before, because we're different than we were the last time, even if it was yesterday that you read it. We bring ourselves to the text. But I think in these particular days, new readings of the text through the lens of this pandemic can give us some ways of coping with all that's going on around us. You might remember, we've talked about this before together, that in the Gospel of John, he has 7 signs between chapter 2 and chapter 11. He has 7 signs. And they're called signs. They're not called miracles. They're miracles. They're 7 miracles. 7 are the ones that are attributed to Jesus. But John uses the word semeion, a particular word that means an indicator, something that points to something else. In the other Gospels, when they're talking about miracles or something we might translate as miracle, it's dunamis, like power, like we get the word dynamite from. Teros, wonder, or ergon, the word for work, like a mighty work. But semeion is a different one. And so in chapter 6, I was looking back again and I thought, well, just look at the first 21 verses of John 6. We've got miracles, we got signs 4 and 5 right here, back to back. And so we know the story of the feeding of multitudes, and we know the story of Jesus walking on water. So why would we look at those again? Because they're signs. And when we look at them again today, when we look at them through the lens that each of us are wearing, the lens as we sit through, experience this pandemic, what do we think is going on here? For the other gospel writers, for the synoptic gospel writers, the miracles are amazing feats or wonders, sort of set to demonstrate the power and to impress the people. But for John, they're signs. So what is John pointing to? Well, he tells us, you might remember, he doesn't tell us in that little section of the signs between 2 and 11, but way over in chapter 20 near the end, the writer John says, now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of disciples that aren't written in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and believing you might have life in his name. So he answers our question. This is why I did this. This is why I put these in here. These are your pointers. And so it seems to me it's good, pandemic or no pandemic, it's good for us to go back and to look at these and ask ourselves some questions. So let's think about for a few minutes these two miracle stories. This first one, the feeding of the 5,000, is that one that's in all four Gospels. And so we know it. It's 4,000, 5,000, feeding of the multitudes. But when you go back and look at it, you recognize that John tells it just a little differently, and maybe that can give us some clues. In John's version of the story, Jesus goes to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. He goes to the Gentile side, and he even throws in the Gentile name, the Tiberias. And so that feels a little different. He sounds a little different. And when he gets there, he goes up on a mountain. What does that sound like? Who does that sound like? Moses, right. Sounds like Moses. So now we're little bit more interest is piqued here. So we're just going to think about how we hear this story. Goes up on the mountain, sits down. And when I was reading this one again and again, he sat down, and then John tells us, now it was about the time of the Passover. Now, nobody else bothers to say that. What was that? And that just continues to stir up more Moses imagery, doesn't it? So it's like all these little things are just kind of playing around in our heads. And did you notice, if you went back to read John chapter 6 at the beginning, that it never says the people were hungry? Doesn't say that. Doesn't say anybody's asking for anything. Jesus brings up food. Crowd here. And Jesus brings up food, and what he says is very interesting. He looks at Philip and he says, how are we going to buy bread so these people can eat? That's a great question coming from Jesus. You think, you don't have to ask that, Jesus. I mean, fortunately, you and I've had the other stories to read, so we know how he can take care of this. How are we going to buy bread so that these people can eat?
Your credit's good, Jesus.
That's right. But poor Philip. Philip is, he is kind of negative. He said, we don't have enough money altogether to do that. Just dismisses it right out of hand. It reminds me of, again, because I've got Moses in my brain now, of Moses in the wilderness when he asked God in the wilderness, where are we going to get food for all of these people? Well, we know the answer to that, right? We know who provided the manna. So Jesus is asking Philip, and we're a little disappointed. I'm a little disappointed when Philip says we don't have enough food. So he turns to Andrew, and Andrew's a little perkier, and he's seen a kid that has some food. So he just pops up and says, well, there's a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they anyway? So he stays up for like half a second And then, yeah, but five barley loaves and two fish, not going to feed this crowd either. And so we're right back down where we were. But Jesus has them sit down, takes what they've got. The barley loaves remind us of Elisha. Elisha was, just a little aside, Elisha was said to have fed 100 people with only 12 barley loaves. And that was quite something. But if we're going to feed, a minimum 5,000, and that's if no women or children were there, and I'm sure they were, we're going to do that with 5 barley loaves. But I love the little echoes back to the Old Testament, back to Moses, back to some of these other things that have gone on. And I'm reminded of manna in the wilderness. I'm reminded of God's providing. I'm reminded of God's providing so much that there are leftovers. This is a familiar story, but it has this particular way of telling it is slightly different. Another thing that, all right, I put my glasses somewhere. I don't know if you noticed this. When everyone had sat down, Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. Now we almost all know, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and blessed it and said, I mean, that just kind of comes right out because that's what we know. He didn't break this bread. You got to wonder if that is going to have some implications for, or if it's meant to send us not only backwards to the Passover and to Moses, but forward to the death of Jesus when not a bone was broken. It was an offering that was whole. Lots of really interesting little things in here for us to see. And who serves? Does he give it to the disciples to hand out? No. Jesus does that himself. It's a lot of fun to look at this and to see the differences and to wonder, okay, what is this sign? What sign is John giving us by telling us this story, and by telling us this story this way? Most of you know me well enough to know that I'm not going to spend 20 minutes here now saying, now I think if we just look at Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and then we bring John in, then we can figure out which one of these is what really happened, right? We all know each other better than that. No, there was a story, and there was Jesus who was feeding the crowds. Good enough for me. Now, what does this writer John want us to see? What does he want us to understand about Jesus? The crowd got excited, and they saw that, oh my goodness, this is the prophet that we've been told about. And he discerns that they're going to try to come and get him and make him king. And what does he do? He's out of there. They didn't get it. That's not what this was all about. This is not the kind of kingdom that they are looking for. And at the end of this little section in verse 15, it says, perceiving that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. Oh. So what do you think? What do you think about this story and this, what he is pointing us to? We're going to make him king? checking my chat box. Well, what's a very simple? I mean, this is not, theology 300. This is theology 101. What do you hear in this story? Yes. I'm pointing to you, Dick. I'm going, yes, Dick, go right.
I think he's trying to say I'm the real deal, but I'm not what you think I am.
Okay. Very good. Yes, and I see. Great. Yes. Jesus didn't come to be an earthly king. Right. Kathy Harlan, can you say more about what you wrote, please? Can you unmute?
Yeah, I unmuted myself.
Okay.
Just like sometimes I want my answer now. I don't want to wait. I want you to come and fix everything that's wrong right now.
Exactly. Yeah. But clearly he was not there to do that then. It was, and certainly not in the way, as Dick said, not in the way that they wanted or expected. Let me see what Margarita says. Oh, I love it. Yes, Margaret, this is indeed a story of Jesus's hospitality, much more than a miracle story of how to make 5 loaves, isn't it? He is the ultimate host here. Lovely. Margarita says, in Mexican culture, when guests drop by unannounced, the host always serves, does not ask if hungry or thirsty. Jesus anticipates our needs before we realize our needs. Oh, I think you're really onto something here. And I loved that. It was a long time that I read this miracle story, this story of the feeding of the multitude, before I realized that this John's doesn't talk about hunger. I mean, I think we all just presume the people are hungry and they don't have any food. Now, how are we going to do it? How are we going to feed them? There are needs that were there that were met because the people were filled, right? But what was filled was the need that they had that they probably didn't even know. And that translates. Dave, that preaches, don't you think? I've lost Dave again. Oh, there he is. You all keep moving around on my screen here, and I keep pointing to you.
Hey, Judy.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about verse 14? There are 5,000 people there. They've just been fed. Surely there are a lot of them saying a lot of things.
Right.
But the author either takes this one comment or distills many comments into this figure of the prophet. The prophet's new to Hall. I hear about the Christ, I hear about the Messiah, but I'm not sure who the prophet is. What do you think John is getting at in selecting that comment or sense from the crowd?
Well, I think that a couple things. I think that he's given us all these little hints or echoes of Moses. And, so we were waiting for another one like Moses to come. He was the last of the great ones. And with all of the echoes of Passover and manna in the wilderness, and these folks are hungry. I almost didn't use that word, but I'm going to anyway. Hungry for someone to come and lead them out of the mess they're in. And this surely this one, if you can do this, there's too many things too many touch points. So I think for me, Hall, that's what's going on here. And Jesus realizes, no. This is not what we're talking about. This is not what this ministry is about. This is not why I have come. Fill the needs, absolutely. Save you from the from the powers that be right now. but that doesn't necessarily have to be, a disappointment. I mean, it is initially, because we all know what it's like to want something, and you want it, as Kathy said, you want it the way you want it, and you want it now. And I have thought many times recently about a little prayer that I heard that said, Lord, give me patience, but I want it now. Yeah, that little prayer rings true to me right now. So what John does, I think, then he puts another one, his fourth and fifth signs are right back to back. So as soon as we finish seeing this and seeing that the people misunderstood, and so Jesus left, it's immediately followed by Jesus walking on the water. That's another story we know. We know the story of Jesus walking on the water. This one's not in all four, but it is in 3 out of 4, which is pretty good. And in every one, it follows the feeding story. But it's interesting, I think, to note in John's gospel, when you get to the story of walking on the water, once you've read it and thought about it, you realize, this is not one of those nature miracles. This is not about Jesus calming the seas. That's what it is in Matthew and Mark, how he calms the winds and the seas. In John, it just says he sees that they're afraid, and he reminds them, ego e me, you know that, it is I. Don't be afraid. And here we go again, because we've talked about this together also, this ego e me, I am. Jesus is the great I am in John. I am the way, the truth, the life. I am the bread of life. I am the living water. And we know what that goes back to. What does that hearken us back to? Or who? Once again,
Moses.
Moses, absolutely right. When Moses and God are having a conversation, and God wants Moses to lead the people out to the promised land, and Moses stutters and stumbles, and that was, I to please get my brother because he's a better talker. It's not, and God just sticks with him. And finally Moses said, look, these people know me. They've seen me in action. What I'm going to come back and say, I'm going to take you out. I'm going to lead you out. Who am I going to say sent me? And what does God say? Tell them I am. And so for us who know anything about those old texts, this is an amazing picture of Jesus as the embodiment, as the empowerment of God in this story. And he says, I am. So don't be afraid. That's a lovely story. And it's, I'm taken back to your thoughts a minute ago, Kathy, when, I think, oh, that's lovely. And I like that. And I can say that to myself. And then I hear the news and I go, oh, wait a minute. Okay, this is awful. This is horrible. This is nothing's ever going to be right. And I let myself go down that hole again. And I realize there are times when that has to be sufficient for the day. That has to be sufficient for the day. I have to trust that God is. So don't be afraid. It isn't, don't see all that's going on around you. Don't try to work to make it all better. It isn't, don't do your part to calm the storms of life around you or for somebody else. But it is that which focuses us and holds us in a way that the fears tend to just rip us apart. And what is so amazing and so delightful to me about this particular story, it's different in that it's not calming the water. It's different in a number of ways, but it's so simple. It's I, do not be afraid. And then they were glad to take him into the boat. And immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. That's not part of the story the way the others tell it. I love that. Once they heard and once they let him in, they were already where they were going. That's pretty powerful. That's a pretty amazing story. That's a sign. And if we're willing to open our eyes, it's like a sign in neon lights. Yes. And when they took him into the boat, they were glad to take him into the boat. And immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. These two stories are pretty fun. They're pretty familiar and they're brand new. And I love that about the biblical text, because our day today is different than our day last week. It's different than our days will be tomorrow. But what I saw when I looked at these again and was thinking about all of you, it seemed to me that in this, if we go back to the first one for a minute, the miracle of the loaves, John is pointing us to a deeper meaning about who Jesus is, not as they and we sometimes frame who we think he is, who we need him to be, who we want him to be. But this is pointing to a deeper meaning about this, and about not only Jesus filling a very basic human need of food, people have to eat, but a very spiritual need as well. How many of you have ever seen or heard of the movie Babette's Feast? Anybody? If you haven't, and you have a little time on your hands, and I know you all do, you can probably find it on, it used to be Blockbusters, but that's like how old I am. So Netflix, I don't know, any of these different platforms. Find Babette's Feast. It's this lovely story that I think captures in many ways what I think the sign is of John's telling of the of the feeding of the multitudes, because Babette is a French chef, and she had fled Paris when it was dangerous and ended up in this little village in Denmark, and made her home in this little Christian community that was very dour. They were living, they were very pious and living a very simple life, and I wouldn't say deliriously happy, but they were, they were steady Christians in their village. And she lived there for years, and she was a cook. So, I mean, she was a famous chef, but there she was a cook, and she fixed the simple food that they wanted her to fix. And she did that for years and years and years. And the pastor of the community died, and the people were becoming very quarrelsome, querulous, petulant. And Babette had left everything to come, to be free, to be safe. The one thing she had left over was a lottery ticket. And she won the lottery. And she decided to spend all of her money on preparing a feast for this little community, a beautiful feast of the kinds of foods that she used to make when she was back in Paris. And the people decided that, well, they would eat, but they would not comment on it, because they were meant to be eating simply. And so they would be polite, but they would not say, I mean, you know how we are sometimes. We just get so ahead of ourselves with our piety that we get it turned upside down and inside out. But as you can imagine, as they feasted on this food, it was marvelous. And they began to speak to one another differently. And this was a meal that transformed them. And I just think this story is so fun and so like John's gospel, because it wasn't just something so that they could get to the next day. It was food for the soul. It was transformational food, transformative food. And this little community was filled. And John's community was filled. And you and I can be filled if we're willing to see the signs, if we're willing to look and see the signs. Jesus does, but through the words of John, actually clarifies this for us if we keep going. And you can this afternoon, if you don't have a ball game you're going to watch, or even if you do, just carry on for a few more verses in John and see what Jesus says. It's as if he's explaining to them and us this whole business about what he was doing, feeding the multitudes, because that's where we're told the story of Jesus. I am the bread of life. That's the manna. There is the food. There is the bread that fills us. And he started out and he told us that as he told the story of the feeding of the multitudes. And then he tells us that after he gets to, after he's assured us in the sign about the Jesus walking on water. And when they took him in, they got to the other side. But then if you just keep going, well, let me see. What sign do you do, they said, that we may see and believe you? What work do you perform? Our fathers ate manna in the wilderness, as it is written. He gave them bread from heaven to eat. And Jesus said, truly I say to you, it wasn't Moses who gave you bread from heaven. My Father gives you the bread from heaven. For the bread of God is that which comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. And this is so like the woman at the well, who, remember when she asks him, the woman at the well asks him for that living water? This crowd says, Lord, give us this bread. Give us this bread always. And Jesus said, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall not hunger. He who believes in me shall never thirst. So it is this lovely combination of stories that ring so true and that are just filled with echoes of stories we've heard before, from Moses to Passover to the manna in the wilderness. With the walking on the water, we see and hear echoes of God's creating out of the deep, of God setting his throne, God's throne on the waters. The waters that have signified evil and chaos for us are now under control. And when we take that in, then we're already at the place where we were going. So it seems to me, friends, that in these crazy, crazy times, you and I can rest assured that ours is a God whose miracles, whose signs can be seen in the meeting of daily needs, and attention to those needs that bind us together, especially in these times. And maybe our eyes might be opened and our hearts might be assured that our God is there in the feeding of the hungry, where we see those positive things going on, where we participate in those things that are going on as we can and where we can, whether it's a very physical human need or whether it's like consolation of the brokenhearted. And our God today is still able to walk on water. And we know that. To surprise us coming across those waters, those chaotic waters, in the midst of our fears and keep us from drowning. So my hope for all of us as we continue into this new year is that we'll do it with our eyes and our ears and our hearts wide open and look for the signs. Look for the signs that might be around us. Resting in the truth that you and I have always known, but it's easy to forget in the chaos and the fear. Hoping in the midst of and in spite of what is so loud and troublesome around us. We can do this. We can do it individually, and we can do it as a community. And I am grateful to you for letting me stay a part of your community, for feeling like I can come and look with you again at stories we've looked at many times and say, we got this. We've got this. Not that we're walking away or turning our eyes from what's actually going on, because we're not. We're in the thick of it. Not because we think at some moment it's all going to be perfect or that we're going to be perfect, but because we have a God who walks on water. We have a God who creates calm out of chaos.
Oh.
And I'm reminded, and want to share with you before we go downstairs and find that man by the piano. I've been thinking about some words from a song of Leonard Cohen. Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. So into this imperfect world, some days with bigger cracks than others, we know that that's how the light gets in. I wish you many, many signs and wonders. I wish you the ability and the strength and the courage to look through those cracks and allow the light to come in. Thanks.